Right. Is there something approximating a gavel? Or should I- Okay. Ah, there it is. Okay. Good morning. Welcome to today's hearing entitled The Future of Coal, Utilizing America's Abundant Energy Resources. And now the Subcommittee on Energy will come to order. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures of today's witness panel. I now recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement, and then I'll turn over to my ranking member, Mr. Swalwell. Thank you all for being here, and we'll have others trickling in as the morning goes on. Coal is of critical importance to the United States. From Thomas Edison's construction of the world's first electric power plant in 1892 through today, coal has led the way in enabling the enormous improvements to America's health and well-being. It remains our leading source of affordable and reliable electricity, providing a foundation for our national and economic security while directly supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs and powering industrial facilities that produce the inexpensive goods we too often take for granted, so middle and lower income Americans can enjoy a higher standard of living and make their hard-earned dollars go farther. Rarely, however, has such a beneficial, life-improving resource upon which society depends been under such hostile attack. Adding injury to insult, this attack is being led by our own president. In 2008, President Obama boasted on the campaign trail that his policies would necessarily bankrupt any company that wanted to build a coal-fired power plant. Unfortunately, this is one campaign promise that the president appears determined to keep. Not only are his EPA power plant regulations effectively prohibiting new coal plants from being constructed, they are imposing massive costs on existing plants and forcing scores of shutdowns. For example, 288 coal units in 32 states cited current and pending EPA regulations as a factor contributing to their expected closure. Senior members of the Obama administration have readily acknowledged the negative impacts of these policies. For example, former DOE Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy Jim Wood estimated that EPA rules could force up to 70 gigawatts of coal offline. Adding, quote, number one, electric rates are going to go up. Number two, whether or not construction jobs in the green industry are created, I think there are virtually no manufacturing jobs that are likely to be created from the replacement of coal. 3, transmission grid stability is likely to emerge as a major issue, both because of the shutdowns and because of the intermittency of renewables. EPA is just one agency leading the war on coal. On Tuesday, the House Natural Resources Committee discussed the Department of Interior's anti-coal regulations that would restrict coal mining activities and result in thousands of lost jobs in the coal mining industry. Incredibly, the president is even attempting to limit the global use of coal by restricting international aid for it in developing countries, thus limiting access to the primary means through which those countries' citizens escape poverty. Even if the president were successful in his quest to eliminate all U.S. coal-fired power plants, any potential reductions in projected global warming would be more than overtaken by global emission growth. China continues to build a coal plant a week, and global coal demand is projected to grow significantly over the next half century, regardless of U.S. domestic policy. The purpose of today's hearing and the challenge before us in this subcommittee is to apply these regulatory, economic, and global realities to improve the focus and prioritization of DOE's coal-related activities. To this end, I look forward to hearing more about the recently developed coal R&D roadmap and how it could help identify technology opportunities to increase efficiencies, reduce pollutants, minimize water consumption, and lower the cost of electricity. I'm also eager to examine in more detail the truly innovative research underway at the Western Resources Institute in Wyoming. WRI serves as a model of how to bring together public, private, and academic stakeholders to advance development and use of abundant and affordable energy supplies. Thanks. And I now yield to Ranking Member Swalwell for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Lummis. And first, I ask unanimous consent that Ranking Member Johnson of the whole committee, that her opening statement be entered into the record. She will not be able to be here today, but has been a leader in this area, and I hope the committee will accept that.
Accepted.
Thank you. And I also wanted to thank you for holding this hearing, and I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today. And I'm pleased also to welcome Ms. Judy Greenwald from the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, a group that does a lot of work in Texas, the home state of our full committee chairman, Mr. Smith, our ranking member, Ms. Johnson, and my colleague on this subcommittee, Mr. Vasey. And Mr. Vasey will introduce Ms. Greenwald in a moment. This morning, before I came over here, I had some students in my office, just a part of a constituent thing that we do about a couple times a month, and they asked where I was going, and I told them I was going to this hearing on coal. And these are students from my district, kind of had this puzzling look on their face. And I said, yes, that's right, coal. I know you're from California. We don't necessarily rely upon coal as our energy resource, but the rest of the country in many places does. And I explained to them that we're at this point right now in our country where we're in a struggle and a poll, and we're trying to figure out where are we going to provide, how are we going to provide the future of our energy needs. And in California, we're proud that 20% of our electricity in 2009, the last study that was available, was provided by renewables. And so California has always seen ourselves as kind of leading the country forward and moving away from dirty fossil fuels that could hurt the environment and not be so good for our children or the future. But coal does have a place to play, and I'm interested and have always agreed that the all of the above approach is the way we should go, and wherever we can make it safe, we should make it happen. And I support the chair's interest in doing this. But I say that what the president talked about a couple weeks back with climate change was not a war on coal. In fact, I saw it as the opposite. I saw it as a retreat from coal, not a war on coal, but an attempt for the United States to eventually, one day, hopefully, pull out of coal and pull closer to more renewable, cleaner energy sources. And that's what I support. And so, until that day comes, I will continue to work with our chair to find a future of coal that is clean and good for our environment. And we should not ignore the possibilities available today as we continue to move and strive for the fuels of tomorrow. And programs like the National Enhanced Oil Recovery Initiative demonstrate their innovative capabilities of a mature coal industry that has long enjoyed federal support. Carbon capture and storage and enhanced oil recovery are examples of important technologies that will help ensure that our present reliance on coal will not hinder our ability to move towards a cleaner, safer environment. These advances also support Americans working in these industries today, even as we lay the foundation for emerging energy technologies that will support the workforce of the future. So I look forward to working with you, Chair, on doing this, hearing from our witnesses, and making progress in this area. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. And we have not seen the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith, come in. We have accepted the statement of the ranking member of the full committee. If there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. Well, thank you. We'll begin then. I would like to introduce our witnesses, and I will defer to Mr. Vasey, who has, when he arrives. Oh, excellent. Well, your opportunity to introduce Ms. Greenwald will be occurring shortly. Our first witness today is Chris Smith, Acting Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy at the Department of Energy. Mr. Smith was appointed in 2009 as Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy's Office of Oil and Natural Gas. Prior to joining DOE, Mr. Smith spent 11 years with international oil companies focused on upstream business development and LNG trading. Our second witness is Ben Yamagata. Did I get that right, Mr. Yamagata?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Executive Director at the Coal Utilization Research Council. Mr. Yamagata is also a partner at Van Ness Feldman, where his practice encompasses energy, environment, and natural resources. He has also served as counsel and staff director for the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Subcommittee on Energy Research and Development. Our third witness is Don Collins, Chief Executive Officer at the Western Research Institute. Mr. Collins focuses on transitioning scientific and applied research into technologies. He has spent 29 years of experience in engineering, management of research, and deploying of new technologies. And for today's final witness, Judy Greenwald, I yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Facey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I introduce Ms. Greenwald, I would be remiss if I did not mention that Mr. Smith is from Fort Worth, my hometown in Texas, just outside of Dallas, and happy to have him on the panel today. And wanted to introduce Judy Greenwald. Judy is the Vice President for Technology and Innovation at the Center for Climate and Energy Solution. She oversees very many important aspects of that organization, including the analysis and promotion of innovation in the major sectors that contribute to climate change, including transportation, electric power, buildings, and industry. In addition to her 30 years of working on environmental and energy policy, she also has a strong Texas connection and has worked with many organizations and individuals in our great state, and I want to welcome her here this morning. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vasey. And now we'll go to our witnesses. As you may know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. We welcome you here today, Mr. Smith. You are recognized first to present your testimony. My favorite boot store in all of America is in Fort Worth, and we're delighted to have a good Fort Worth native amongst us. So, Mr. Smith, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Lummis. Lots of Fort Worth references this morning, so I'm happy with that. So thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the subcommittee. And I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the Department of Energy's coal research and development activities. Recently, our Secretary Ernie Moniz, announced an $8 billion draft loan guarantee solicitation to promote the early development and deployment of innovative fossil energy projects that reduce carbon emissions. This solicitation, in addition to the $6 billion the Obama administration has already committed to clean coal technologies, reflects the President's commitment to an all-of-the-above strategy that embraces an energy mix of nuclear power, renewable energy sources, and fossil fuel, including clean coal. The Department of Energy continues to play a leadership role in the development of clean coal technologies with a focus on carbon capture and storage, or CCS. The Clean Coal Research Program, in partnership with the private sector, is focused on maximizing efficiency and environmental performance while minimizing the costs of these new technologies. In recent years, the program has been restructured to focus on clean coal technologies with carbon capture and sequestration. The program pursues the following two major strategies. First, capturing and storing greenhouse gases, and second, improving the efficiency of fossil energy systems. The Clean Coal Research Program is addressing the key challenges that confront the development and deployment of clean coal technologies through research on cost-effective capture technologies, monitoring, verification, and accounting technologies to ensure permanent storage and the development of advanced energy systems. To get there, we're pursuing these three technical pathways for carbon capture: post-combustion, pre-combustion, and oxy-combustion. Research in these pathways is exploring a wide range of approaches that, coupled with advances in efficiency improvements and cost reductions from developments in gasification turbines, will help provide a technology base for the commercial deployment of CCS technologies. On the storage side, we've pursued projects to develop and design innovative advanced technology and protocols for the monitoring, verification, accounting of CO2 storage in geologic formations, as well as simulating the behavior of geologically stored CO2. Our regional carbon sequestration partnerships are an essential component of that effort. The program is currently in the development phase, during which large-scale field testing involving at least 1 million metric tons of CO2 per project will be implemented. Several of these large-scale tests are currently underway, and one project has safely injected over 3.6 million metric tons and is being monitored for safe and permanent storage. The Department is implementing large-scale projects through the regional partnerships, the Clean Coal Power Initiative, FutureGen 2.0, and the Industrial Carbon Capture and Storage Program. We currently have 8 major CCS demonstration projects nationwide, and there have been important advances in several of them. For example, the Archer-Daniels-Midland ICCS project in Illinois will demonstrate an integrated system of CCS in an ethanol production plant. The project is under construction and is nearly 50% complete. FutureGen 2.0 has successfully completed Phase 1, and Phase 2 commenced in February of this year. The project is now focused on the preliminary design and engineering. Current demonstrations are focused on storing CO2 in a variety of geologic formations, including enhanced oil recovery. Enhanced oil recovery represents the most commercially attractive utilization option for CO2 storage that could produce substantial quantities of oil while permanently storing CO2 in geologic formations. There are currently 6 projects employing CO2 EOR and 2 projects employing saline storage underway across the United States. And as with saline storage projects, CO2 EOR projects will be subject to rigorous monitoring, verification, and accounting procedures and technologies to ensure their safety and effectiveness. Today, nearly 3 out of 4 coal-burning power plants in this country are equipped with technologies that can trace their roots back to the Department of Energy's Advanced Coal Technology Program. The Office of Fossil Energy's ongoing mission is to ensure that this important resource can be developed and utilized in an environmentally sensible way to strengthen our nation's energy security. And I believe that our Clean Coal Research Program demonstrates that we have the critical experience, expertise, and capabilities, and the track record to meet this challenge. Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, that completes my prepared statement, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I now recognize Mr. Yamagata to present his testimony.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Stillwell, members of the subcommittee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to make these comments today. I'm specifically focused my comments on the 2 subject areas you asked me to address by discussing 4 points. First, in describing to you, as you requested, our coal technology development roadmap done in conjunction with the Electric Power Research Institute, let me say we concluded that we can develop technologies that will achieve very high conversion efficiencies, moving electricity generation from today's high of 39 or 40% to nearly 50%. Following the same roadmap agenda, we will result in significant reductions in traditional air pollutants, leading ultimately to coal-fueled plants that really today are very clean, but will be nearly emissions-free in the future. Since the 1970s, the DOE's coal R&D program and the work of the National Energy Technology Lab in collaboration with industry has, as the Assistant Secretary pointed out, now been installed on many of the coal units in this country. With DOE support, we are confident that technology will be the pathway to also addressing CO2 emissions from the use of coal. Second, you have asked if our roadmap might be a way of examining the prioritization of DOE's R&D activities. Let me start by stating our general agreement with DOE's R&D portfolio and note industry's successful collaboration with the Fossil Energy Office. Where we see need for added emphasis, CCS should not be the singular focus of the government's R&D's supported efforts. We recommend an emphasis also on technology development to address water use and discharge from power plants, and increased support for high-temperature materials development. These advanced materials are key to increasing the efficiency of coal conversion to electricity. DOE may need to focus more attention now on technologies that are truly transformational and that move beyond simply adding a series of improved control technologies to power plant platforms that generate electricity from power generating technology now itself several decades old. And finally, an inquiry should be made whether the pace of technology development pursued by DOE fits the age profile of the country's existing coal fleet. We might require commercially available technology for retrofit of coal units or the replacement of coal units by the early 2020s so the technology can be used in the later 20s or 30s. DOE's technology timelines could be too late by several years. Also, the President's FY 2014 coal R&D budget request is nearly $100 million less than what we believe is required. Third, the added cost of new and pending environmental regulations, uncertainty over future regulations, and market competition from abundant natural gas have led to projections that perhaps 60 to 80 gigawatts of older coal plants, that's 20 to 25% of the existing fleets, will be retired in the next several years. Anticipated CO2 requirements could dramatically increase the number of those requirements. Kirk has commented that the original EPA CO2 proposal for new coal plants requiring those plants to meet a defined CO2 standard that can only be met with the installation of carbon capture technology that is not commercially available nor economic today. This is not a realistic standard. We will await the re-proposal of this rule, but if it is still predicated upon technology that is not commercially available, our concerns remain. Simply directing or assuming the existence of technology will not make it so. And point 4, you asked that we comment upon research activities that should be pursued in the near, mid, and long term. Kirk is developing a 3-part program that is organized around the proposition that technology development is a positive pathway to the sustained and increased use of coal, but our program is being developed through the prism of defining benefits to the nation from coal use. In the near term, we are considering recommendations to undertake the technology R&D to address challenges to the existing baseload fleet, which is now a cycling fleet, while simultaneously confronting ever more stringent air regulations. In the medium term, we need to ensure that the DOE demonstrations currently underway are successful. An additional demonstration program is needed to encourage the construction of world-class coal fuel generation plants meeting very high efficiency and emission control standards and committing those projects to retrofit with carbon capture technology when that technology is commercially available. Also, we would recommend a program to use captured CO2 from coal-using facilities for enhanced oil recovery. We are looking for ways to accomplish our midterm program without new government spending. Progress is being made on this front. And finally, in the long term, government in partnership with industry needs to pursue a targeted R&D program. Thank you for your time, and I'll await your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Yamagata. I now recognize Mr. Collins for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Lummis, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Don Collins from the Western Research Institute located in Laramie, Wyoming. On behalf of everyone at WRI, we deeply appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony on the vital role of innovative scientific research and technology development. It can ensure a diverse energy resource portfolio that utilizes our nation's abundant coal resources efficiently and environmentally responsibly. WRI is a multidisciplinary scientific research and technology development nonprofit institute currently specializing in bioenergy, natural gas, emission capture, environmental monitoring and remediation, asphalt chemistry, heavy and ultra-heavy oils such as Canadian oil sands, as well as clean coal power, gasification, and conversion to transportation fuels, hydrogen, and industrial chemicals. So I will summarize my testimony and request that my testimony be entered into the record. Our view is that R&D work is successful when viable technologies are deployed to the betterment of our country. So in my written testimony, I highlight opportunities to utilize carbon to achieve energy recycling for living in a carbon-rich world. Utilize low-rank coal as an untapped water-rich resource. Increase plant efficiencies to lower emission of hazardous air pollutants and lower water consumption. Leverage existing coal power plant investments to also clean up eco-legacy contamination levels, such as for mercury. Create a diversified energy technology portfolio to best serve very local conditions and resource availability across the United States. Based on WRI's experience and expertise, I recommend that Congress take some of the following actions. Consider policies that allow exploring solutions for living in a carbon-rich world, in addition to living in a carbon-constrained world. Cultivate a national best portfolio strategy to leverage all energy resources and utilization technologies. Formulate a flexible, integrated clean energy technology research portfolio and priorities that consider local and regional constraints. Allocate funding to support the utilization of carbon dioxide to stimulate the transformation of this abundant compound from something to be avoided to a beneficial resource that can be used to increase chemical feedstocks, biofuels, and support national energy self-sufficiency. Allocate resources for research to support the sustainable and environmental safe use of fossil fuels, especially energy and water efficiency advancements in connection with the energy-water nexus. Formulate a federal leadership team to strategically plan and advance energy and water efficiency improvements and environmental impact reductions across the entire coal sector. In summary, WRI, we take a portfolio approach to provide sustainable energy solutions. Our thinking and approach will deliver cost efficiencies and environmental benefits with respect to utilization of coal. The many boom and bust cycles that we have experienced in the energy sector really are a function of the marketplace. But the way in which we can minimize the downside of this fact of life is through an aggressive, innovative partnership between industry, research entities, and the federal and state governments. This will ensure our energy technology portfolio will deliver benefits to the U.S. consumers and protect the environment. I would note, for example, that the state of Wyoming is implementing a long-term strategic plan to maximize the entire energy portfolio within Wyoming, utilizing CO2 for enhanced oil recovery and preparing for long-term storage of CO2. These are precisely the kind of activities the federal government should encourage. Making the best use of limited financial investments, in addition to efficient utilization of all energy resources, is a key to achieving national sustainability goals, energy security, and economic prosperity. In closing, a strong commitment to a portfolio approach that includes solutions for living in a carbon-rich world will facilitate innovation and sustainable economic growth that in turn strengthens U.S. competitiveness. This necessitates continued federal funding of scientific research and technological development. It is essential to maximize the energy efficiency and productivity of our country in the most environmentally and economically sustainable ways. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you, and I would be pleased to answer any questions the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. And now I recognize Ms. Greenwald to present her testimony. Good morning.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, Congressman Swalwell, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and thank you, Congressman Vasey, for that kind introduction. My name is Judy Greenwald, and I'm the Vice President for Technology and Innovation at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. My testimony today will focus on the most important climate and energy solution that no one knows about. I'll emphasize two main points. First, carbon capture and storage, or CCS, is a critical technology for addressing climate change while allowing continued reliance on fossil fuels. Second, carbon dioxide enhanced oil recovery, or CO2 EOR, can advance CCS while boosting domestic oil production and generating net federal revenue. The United States and the rest of the world get 80% of our energy from coal, oil, and gas, and our fossil fuel dependence is expected to continue for the foreseeable future. Carbon dioxide emissions from burning these fuels pose an enormous challenge. That's why we need CCS, a suite of technologies that captures CO2 and stores it deep underground in geological formations. CCS can capture up to 90% of emissions from power plants and industrial facilities, allowing coal and natural gas to remain part of our energy mix. CCS has been commercialized for certain industrial processes. However, CCS in other contexts, for example, coal and natural gas power plants, is a relatively expensive technology that is just reaching maturity. The key challenge for CCS is to get a sufficient number of commercial-scale projects up and running to demonstrate the emerging technologies at scale and bring down their costs. The Department of Energy's role in CCS development has been and will remain critical. DOE is working with the private sector on the leading innovative CCS projects today, including several coal-based power projects. Additional drivers will be needed, though, to help the next generation of CCS projects move forward. That's why CCS is being increasingly thought of as carbon capture utilization and storage, or CCUS. Utilizing captured carbon dioxide for enhanced oil recovery, or CO2 EOR, could play a key role in the development of CCS. It also has the potential to increase American oil production by tens of billions of barrels, while displacing imported oil and safely storing billions of tons of carbon emissions underground. Let me explain how this works. Even after conventional primary and secondary oil recovery, most of the oil in a typical field is left in the ground. Injecting carbon dioxide deep underground can make it possible to recover more oil and extend the field's life. The United States has been a global leader in CO2 EOR for 40 years and gets 6% of its domestic oil this way. While most CO2 EOR activities occurs in the Permian Basin of Texas, there are also projects in Wyoming, the Gulf Coast, Oklahoma, and Michigan. Using existing technology, CO2 EOR could double or triple U.S. reserves. It could also store 10 to 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide, equivalent to 5 to 10 years' worth of emissions from all U.S. coal-fired power plants. More advanced technologies could yield much higher production and CO2 storage. Right now, most enhanced oil recovery is done using carbon dioxide that is already underground and that is, ironically, in short supply. By using captured man-made carbon dioxide, we can increase domestic oil production, promote economic development, create jobs, reduce carbon emissions, and drive innovation in CCS technology. Because of these multiple benefits, we've been able to bring together the National Enhanced Oil Recovery Initiative, or NEORI, a diverse coalition of industry, labor, environmental organizations, and state officials. This coalition's consensus recommendations call for a federal tax incentive to capture man-made CO2 for EOR. In some regions, EOR operators are willing to pay upwards of $30 per ton for CO2. At the same time, industrial facilities and power plants are emitting billions of tons of CO2 into the atmosphere as a waste. CO2 EOR offers the opportunity to transform this waste into a marketable commodity and transform an environmental problem into an energy production solution. By combining private EOR operators willing to pay for CO2 with a tax incentive, society would leverage its public investment. Tax incentives for carbon dioxide enhanced oil recovery would more than pay for themselves within 10 years by increasing domestic oil production and associated taxable oil revenues. Federal revenue would exceed the fiscal cost of new incentives by more than $100 billion over 40 years. To summarize, CCS is a critical technology for reconciling our continued dependence on fossil fuels with the imperative to protect the global climate. Our best hope at the moment for advancing CCS is carbon capture utilization and storage, or CCUS, and the best current example of that is enhanced oil recovery. Solving our climate and energy problems will require a portfolio of technologies, and all must be pursued vigorously. But we are focusing here today on CO2 EOR because it is the most important climate and energy solution that no one knows about. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions and to working with the subcommittee and the Congress to advance this critical technology.
Thank you, Ms. Greenwald, and thank you, panel. Now, if we would limit our questions to 4 minutes each, we could probably, everybody in this room could get to ask questions before our vote series. If there's no objection to going with 4 minutes instead of 5, then so ordered. And we'll start, the chair now recognizes herself for 4 minutes. Thank you, panel, for being here. I'm going to start with Mr. Collins. In your testimony, you talked about integrated portfolio approaches to maximize benefits of coal. Could you tell us which of those technologies you believe are the most promising to improve energy utilization?
Yes, Madam Chairman. We have a process called right coal that will extract the water out of low-rank coals. That in the past has really been a missed opportunity. That low-rank coal, especially out of Wyoming, has been beneficial for reducing sulfur emissions because it's low sulfur content. And the water has just gone up the smokestack along with other emissions. By extracting that water, the front end, we can utilize that water in the power plant and reduce local water consumption in communities that are water stressed by about 50 to 60% for the makeup water, especially in air-cooled systems. So we see that as a second value of low-rank coals, that we're delivering water with the energy resource. Second technology is a chemoautotrophic bacteria process that will operate in the dark 24 hours a day to consume CO2 and make a bio-crude oil that can be used to make synthetic diesel fuel, for instance, and perhaps even other longer-chain carbon molecules like biopharmaceuticals, and turn that carbon in our coal into an additional economic resource by using it more than once. And that's our view, to look at recycling energy.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Now, Mr. Yamagata and Ms. Greenwald, I have a question about the fossil energy loan guarantees. And monies were directed under the Energy Policy Act of 2005 to advance technologies and facilitate commercial application. 4 projects were selected for further evaluation in July of 2009, and to date, no final loan guarantees have been issued. Your groups have focused in part on these loan guarantees and their status. To your knowledge, where are they in the DOE process? Mr. Yamagata, any response there?
Madam Chair, frankly, I don't know where they are. We know that the process that was started several years ago, in which DOE actually accepted, because that is the process, the applications, and the DOE, at least as we understand it, the Secretary or his designee, can stop that process at any point in time, but we don't know that that has ever happened with respect to those 4 projects. So the answer, at least in short, is we're not quite certain where those projects are. They don't appear to have been rejected.
Ms. Greenwald, do you know?
We don't know either.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, I might ask, has DOE taken any steps to advance these projects?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chairwoman. So I manage the Office of Fossil Energy, which oversees all the research and development that's done to advance fossil energy technologies. I don't have oversight over the loan guarantee program. I do know that the projects that were selected in that first round focused primarily on CTL technologies. We have recently announced an additional level or tranche of funding of $8 billion, which is another series of potential loan guarantees that would have a very wide range of applications for fossil energy technologies. We've taken the kind of unprecedented step of offering that for public comment, so we can get feedback back from industry, back from states, back from key stakeholders, so that we can structure that in a way that has the highest probability of attracting the right type of participants and make sure that we're successful moving that forward. So that's the process that we're pushing forward in real time right now.
Thank you, panel. And now I yield to 4 minutes to the ranking member, Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For our witnesses, it is pretty evident now after a number of scientific studies that 97% of scientists agree that human activities are causing climate change. And so I want to ask just each one of you whether you agree or disagree with the 97% of scientists who believe in that. Mr. Smith, do you agree or disagree?
We agree that most of our programs are focused very strictly on reducing CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions.
But do you agree that climate change is caused by human activities?
We do agree that this is something we need to address, so we agree.
Mr. Yamagata, agree or disagree?
You're not going to like this answer. We don't.
Is it agree or disagree?
We don't take a position on the issue. It's not something that we want to deal with. What we want to deal with
is if public policy determines that this is an issue, we've got to have the technologies available to address it.
How about you personally, Mr. Yamagata? Do you agree or disagree?
I think there's a lot of information out there that suggests so.
Mr. Collins, do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, Congressman Swalwell. I would say, probably won't like my answer either. There are multiple contributions to what people consider climate change, and it is not all just man, anthropogenic sources. So that statement, in my mind, is incomplete. So that's why I cannot agree to the question as
Do you
stated.
agree that human activity has played a role, a substantial role in climate change?
The human activity releases a lot of energy into the environment that contributes to the warming. But I also view that CO2 is an untapped resource, and we need to start thinking about how we utilize that. We live in a carbon-rich world. You and I are carbon-based life forms. To consider living in a carbon-free world, to me, sounds like suicide.
All right. And Ms. Greenwald, do you agree or disagree with the 97%?
We agree. I focus on the technology solution side of our organization, but we do have a staff that focuses on science, and we do work in that area and do agree with the scientific consensus.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Greenwald. Mr. Smith, over the history of research to reduce the environmental impacts of coal-fired power plants and to improve their efficiency, where has the bulk of the innovation taken place? Has that been in the private sector, or has it been at the national laboratories or our research universities?
Well, thank you for the question. And without making a direct comparison, I'd say that this is an area in which it's critical for the government to be involved. We work very closely with private industry in all of the major demonstrations that we're pushing out. We need to ensure that we've got scientists that work in our national laboratories, working alongside the practitioners in the field in industry. So that's always going to be a collaborative effort. That's the only way to move forward.
And have federal regulations played a role in incentivizing these innovations? And if so, how?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that we fund critical programs that allow us to do this work. If you look at the investments that we have made since the start of this administration, we've made a significant investment in major demonstrations that came from the Recovery Act, and in every year of the President's budget over the last several years, we have made important, significant investments in carbon capture and sequestration that fund these government programs and allow us to work together with industry.
Great. And I'll yield back in the interest of allowing more questions from our colleagues.
I thank the gentleman and now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nagebauer, for 4 minutes.
Well, Madam Chairman, thank you for holding this important hearing. Mr. Smith, the Environmental Protection Agency is moving forward with greenhouse gas regulations on both new and existing coal-fired plants. In EPA's initial regulatory proposal for new plants released last year, the EPA rulemaking assumed that CCS technology would be commercially available within 10 years of plant initiating operations. Do you agree that with this new proposed rule, which I understand is now under revision, would it basically effectively ban the construction of new coal plants without CCS?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. I can't comment on the rule as it's not yet been published. It's in interagency review at the moment, and that's the process being managed centrally. What I can say is that the Department of Energy has an important role to play in terms of shaping that rule, and we believe it's critically important that we're working together with EPA and that we're working together with industry to ensure that these technologies are commercially ready, that they are being developed, that we are making the right investments, and that these innovations are created here in the United States so that we are creating that opportunity here for our country. So that's the role that the Department of Energy plays in that process.
Well, along those same lines, though, then would you agree that in order for CCS to be a part of the new coal plant, that significant technical, legal, property rights, and liability issues will have to be resolved?
Congressman, I agree that there are myriad issues that need to be resolved, and that's the process that we are in real time going through. This is an important innovation that will allow us to achieve this mission.
So then, with that in mind, what is the earliest time frame in which you can state with confidence that CCS will be commercially available for utility scale?
Well, Mr. Congressman, I'd state that currently we know an awful lot about how to capture CO2, and we know an awful lot about storing it. The work that we're going to right now is to ensure that we're continuing to push these costs down, and that we're making it more and more affordable for a broad scale release. So I can't make a projection in terms of what exactly that cost curve is going to look like, But that's the process of innovation that we're going through now, and we're making important strides in real time in that mission.
So I guess the question is back to kind of where I started, is if we can't get to that point, are we basically keeping new power plants from being brought online and potentially closing existing ones? I think the chairwoman mentioned some statistics of how many plants had been closed. And so the vagueness of your answer leads me to believe that you're not sure whether this technology will be in place, and that in fact would preclude bringing those plants online, wouldn't it?
Well, coal's under stress from a number of factors, including the emergence of natural gas that has pushed natural gas prices down, and natural gas has leapfrogged coal in a lot of areas in terms of how coal power plants get dispatched. That's a challenge, and it makes it difficult for these plants to move forward. What we're working on is making sure that we're not only focused on CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, and lowering those costs, but we're also working with industry to improve efficiencies, to improve processes, better sensors, better materials, to ensure that this important part of our energy mix continues to contribute to energy security in the future. This is research activity. These are technological innovations. They don't have certainty, just as any research topic tends not to, but we're making investments to ensure that we are moving that forward, and we do have a high level of confidence.
So would this be a true statement that this administration is not a big fan of coal?
I would say that's categorically not a true statement. I mean, if you look at the investment that we've made since this administration started, almost $6 billion invested in CCS technologies, greater efficiencies, better materials, better processes, more efficient turbines. These are all investments that we've made to ensure that this important source of domestic energy, coal, continues to be part of the clean energy economy of the future. So it's, when we say all of the above, I mean, that's not a slogan. It's an investment this administration has made over the past 4 years. So I actually would not agree with that comment, respectively, Mr. Congressman.
I thank the gentleman from Texas and yield to another gentleman from Texas, Mr. Vesey, and it's Vesey, isn't it?
That is correct, Madam Chair. Thank
You know, I had T-shirts made for my second campaign that said "Lummus rhymes with hummus" on them, just because I got it so much. So I suggest the T-shirt route, Mr.
Yes.
The gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
I have done the VZ is easy before. Yes, I have. And I wanted to ask Ms. Greenwald specifically if she could tell me a little bit more about her organization's work with important carbon capture and storage and reuse projects in Port Arthur, as well as Pinwell. And for those of you that aren't from Texas, Port Arthur is a very important geographic area as it relates to energy and the refining.
And represented by the greatest congressman in the world. I'm just saying.
That would be Mr. Weber. Ms. Greenwald, please.
Well, I'm glad that I can talk about projects that are near and dear to both of your hearts. We were actually just in Port Arthur recently. We had a workshop for state and provincial officials from both the U.S. and Canada talking about CO2 EOR and its relationship to carbon capture and storage. And while we were there, we did a site visit to the Air Products facility in Port Arthur, Texas. And that's a hydrogen production facility that is doing carbon capture, and they are using their CO2, they're sending it into a pipeline to be used for CO2 EOR. So it's a classic example of the kind of project that is really making a difference, moving ahead on carbon capture and also advancing our increasing U.S. oil production. So it's a great project. It's also getting DOE funding, so it's a huge DOE success as well. And so that's been a great project, and they just got up and running a few short months ago, and Air Products is also a member of our National Enhanced Oil Recovery Initiative group, and so they've been active in that as well.
Good, good. Let me ask you about CCS, and how would you compare the need to support CCS with the need to support other energy sources, such as renewable energy or nuclear power? And I think particularly with renewable energy and that support going hand in hand, because it's something that we really don't talk about enough. And if we want to have a serious all-above approach, I think that we obviously need to.
Yeah, the way we think about this is we think about a strategy, we might say, all of the above clean. We basically think that all of these technologies, nuclear power, renewables, efficiency, carbon capture and storage with gas or coal, all of the most promising technologies we should be working on, both in the R&D level, but also in deployment and encouraging them to be used more in the marketplace. So we recommend that we pursue a portfolio approach and make sure that we have a range of technologies that are available. For us, it's all about performance. If any particular fuel or technology can give the environmental performance that we need and the energy security benefits that we need, that's what we want to achieve. So we don't come at it and say this is the best technology. As I said in my testimony, though, the reason we've been focusing on CO2ER today and recently is that that's an example of a solution that a lot of people just don't know about. But we do support looking all across the board and making sure that we're placing bets on the most promising technologies so that they'll be available for broader use in the marketplace and encouraging the use of the cleanest and most energy beneficial projects in the marketplace.
Thank you, Ms. Greenwald. I appreciate you answering those questions and appreciate your work on these important energy and environmental issues. Thank you very much. Madam, I yield back the balance.
Thank you, Mr. VC, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Before I ask my question, I just want to say that I have Friends of Coal plates on my car, and my car truly is a friend of coal. It got me here on time today because it's powered with coal. It's an electric car, and it's charged by coal power. So I'm very excited about coal as an abundant resource here in the United States because it gives us the opportunity to have energy independence and releases us from some of these foreign entanglements. So I'm very troubled by what looks like the administration's bias against coal. And I've been told by the engineers in my district, they just brought online in 2011 a supercritical boiler unit. It's a state-of-the-art coal-fired facility in the Trimble County station. But they told me the other day that even though this thing qualified for clean energy tax credits and whatnot 2 years ago, today it would be illegal to build. They wouldn't be able to build it because it doesn't comply with the administration's rules that are going to be promulgated. Mr. Smith, could you tell me, is that correct? Would it be impossible to build a compliant coal station today without CCS technology?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. Obviously I can't respond to the specific instance because I'm not familiar with the plans or the details behind it. And
would it be possible to build a coal plant without CCS technology that's compliant today?
Again, we're not the regulatory agency, so I mean, I really can't answer questions that are specific to how the regulations operate. I can talk to the technology pathways that we're pursuing, our broad administration goals, how we're working with EPA. So I could address those points.
Okay. Well, I'll assume they were correct then in stating that. Let me ask you a question then that maybe you can answer. I think we need to, because we're determining policy, we can't base it on opinions. I'm an engineer, and I believe that without facts, all you have is an opinion. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for facts and numbers here today. If the Earth has warmed because of human activity, can you tell me what percentage of that warming was due to anthropogenic causes?
Mr. Congressman, what I can say, without getting into a detailed scientific discussion of the science,
I'm just looking
change,
for a number, like a percentage.
What I can tell you is that we do believe that anthropogenic CO2 production, anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions are an important component of global warming, and it's something that we do have to comprehensively address.
That's an opinion, so let's take it into the realm of facts. What percent would you apply to anthropogenic causes?
Again, Mr. Congressman, I'm not going to go through a peer review of scientific studies and select the number. I can say that it's comprehensively important, and we could certainly provide your office with more details.
Well, I'd love to see this facts, because every time somebody from the DOE comes here, we ask this question. We've never gotten an answer to that question. I do have another question that's based on math, and this is a little bit easier exercise. What is the percent cost increase in coal-produced electricity that you associate with CCS technology?
Well, right now, we're looking at three, I guess, separate tranches in the way that we think about the implementation of CO2 technologies.
If it were ideally implemented, what would the additional cost be to a kilowatt hour?
Well, Mr. Congressman, it would depend on the state of the technology at the point of implementation.
I think in your testimony notes, you said between 35 and 70%. Is that a good range?
I think that would be a reasonable range.
Okay, so let's say it's 50%. And if a middle-class family had a $200 electric bill in Kentucky, 50% of 200 is what? $200.
That would be $100.
Okay, so their electric bill would go from $200 to $300, and in 12 months, they'd have another $1,200 electric bill.
Right.
Does the administration, does the DOE care that this is going to push some people below the living standard, and that more people may have to go on public assistance because of the promulgating the carbon capture technology?
The point that the position the DOE takes on this is that these are technologies that are going to be critical to be developed. Our job is to make sure that they're done in a way that's most cost effective, that minimizes the impact on consumers, that ensures that clean coal has a role in the clean energy economy of the future, ensures that we have energy security here in the United States, and that we have the maximum amount of energy diversity for families throughout the U.S.
But you wouldn't dispute those numbers?
I'd state that if we do not move forward on these technologies, that we're not going to have a pathway to ensure that coal is part of the clean energy economy of the future. This is work that we must do to ensure that we do keep this important energy source.
Gentleman's time
Thank
has
you very
expired.
much.
I'm
I yield
so
back.
sorry, Mr. Massey. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Tucano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Smith, I want to explore a little bit more about the competitiveness of coal vis-a-vis natural gas. Can you tell me the impact that the increased efficiency and the technology in terms of extracting natural gas have had on coal's competitiveness?
Well, thank you for the question. It's had a pretty large impact. If we look at availability of natural gas and how that's changed over the past decade, a couple of data points. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, as Mr. VC mentioned, geographic center of the Barnett Shale. When I grew up there, there was absolutely no gas production, or very, very little, and now it's an absolute boom. Prices for natural gas were, creeping into the double digits at one point. They bottomed out at somewhere around $2 last year, and so as you have that large decrease in the price for natural gas, it brings another option for American consumers. We think that's generally positive.
I mean, would it be fair to say that the viability of natural gas has become a war on coal?
I'm
being a little facetious there. Yeah, I'm just saying that it seems like the market forces have more to do with coal's struggling than administration policy.
Markets have a lot to do with it, and it's also part of the rationale why we have to be working very closely with industry to make sure that we are working together to develop these technologies to make sure that coal remains relevant.
Well, let's talk a little more about coal versus natural gas. I mean, what makes natural gas such a more compelling source of energy on the fossil fuel side?
Well, I would dispute the, categorization of more compelling because we think that energy diversity is very important, and that in all of the above, we have to make sure that we're using all of our energy sources. But I would say that natural gas has the benefit of having half of the CO2 impact, and right now it's much more affordable than it was just 5 years ago.
Thank you for that. I mean, I don't mean to cast. So it seems to me, just looking at the administration's policies, that the expenditures that it's seeking to make it looks like it's trying to make coal competitive. I mean, I would characterize the administration policies as not a war on coal, but an attempt to make coal competitive with other sources of energy. So we have, because it's plentiful in our country, it is something in our back pocket that we can develop potentially in the future for energy independence.
Well, we believe that energy diversity is a very important part of the all of the above strategy. Coal creates a lot of jobs. It creates a lot of economic benefits in those parts of the country in which coal production is important. We firmly believe that the clean energy economy of the future is going to be a carbon-constrained world. And the only way that we can ensure that there's a role for all of our energy sources, which is going to be good for our economy, good for our energy security, is to move forward with the research and development to ensure that we are doing something about the problem that we have with coal, which is it's a major emitter of CO2. That's the challenge that we have to rise to, and that is the heart of our collaboration with the industry to move forward on these technologies.
So the way so I see. Thank you for your comments. I think the policy of the administration is really an attempt to be supportive of coal, to keep it as a viable source of energy in the future because it's so plentiful in our country. It will help us with energy independence, and it truly does contribute to the all-of-the-above strategy.
I think that would be an accurate characterization of what our intent is. So
thank you.
I thank the gentleman and yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber.
Thank you. Chris, good to see you. I hadn't seen you since we were down in Port Arthur at that opening of that plant. You said in your conversation with Congressman Augenbauer that you would categorically say it's not true that the administration was waging a war on coal, but let me talk about that very fundamental question of the future of coal in America as it relates to President Obama's policies. During his first campaign, the president famously said that his objective was to bankrupt anyone that tried to build a coal-fired power plant. Since that time, the president has worked hard to deny he was, quote, waging a war on coal. However, after the president announced he intends to aggressively pursue new climate regulations last month, in a moment of candor, one of his key advisors said, and I'm quoting, politically, the White House is hesitant to say they're having a war on coal. On the other hand, a war on coal is exactly what's needed, end quote. Now, that was one of the president's advisors. So my question to you, Chris, and I've got a list here for you, is what is the administration doing? Is it much more important than what the president and his advisors are saying? Do they say one thing and do another? And let me just say, consider this list of the recent pending regulations affecting coal. Number one, carbon regulations. I think my colleague down here, Mr. Massia, talked to you about it, on new coal power plants, carbon regulations on existing coal power plants, utility MACT, M-A-C-T, with EPA estimated compliance costs of $10 billion with a B dollars, cross-state air pollution rule, which I know you're familiar with, BACT, or best available control technology, rules for greenhouse gas emissions, particulate matter regulations, Section 316B rule concerning cooling water intake, and the list goes on and on and on. Effluent limitation regulations costing between $200 and $900 million per year, new EPA regional haze requirements, new EPA monitoring, mountaintop mining rules, Department of Interior stream buffer zone regulations, and forthcoming ozone regulations, which are projected to be the most costly regulation in the history of the U.S. government, most recently estimated by, no, it's not your agency, but the EPA, to cost $90 billion with a B dollars annually. And yet we say that the president's administration, with all due respect to my colleague from California, says that the gas market has waged a war on coal. Well, that's the free market, and American entrepreneurs will take the free market, and they'll make that work. They'll make that adjustment. Consumers will respond by buying those products. But it is a fact, in my opinion, that this administration has a war on coal. In fact, there's a YouTube video out on him where he was campaigning, and he said under his energy plan, electricity prices would of necessity skyrocket. And I'm sorry, I'm out of time. You say that your mission is to make sure that America has clean, affordable energy. You say a future of a carbon-constrained world. But don't you think that given what I just said is happening, the only thing that's going to be constrained is America's economy and our world competitiveness?
Well, thank you, Congressman. There's a lot there, so I'll try to comment, I guess, on the
You got lots of time, 28 seconds.
Okay, great. Well, last time I saw you, we were down in Port Arthur in your district, where we were doing a ribbon cutting for the Air Products project, which I think was mentioned by one of the panelists. I think that's I mean, we could talk about who said what in a unattributed article, but if you look at what we have actually done, particularly here within the Department of Energy, particularly our research and development projects, we are taking concrete actions to ensure that coal remains relevant. Market forces are going to do what they do. Certainly, the emergence of natural gas has had a big impact on coal. The technological innovations around shale gas have pushed natural gas prices down. We think it's important that as we go forward, that we're making the research, putting the research in place to ensure that coal does continue to have a role. That means
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, the gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hall, Chairman Emeritus of this committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you yesterday for your good question and answering of the EPA people here. I think you put them in their place properly. I want just to touch on the climate change research causation that was inquired, and I think Mr. Smith quickly said yes when he thought that it was people that had caused it. Causation. I just, you know, we were told 12 years ago that they were going to be halfway or 12 feet up on the Statue of Liberty, and it's less than a foot up on Statue of Liberty. All kinds of warnings and people coming before us, being paid a lot to come here to testify, that scared us to death. And just like going to the moon, we're going to go to the moon, but we're not going to the moon until the people can go to the grocery store. And on global warming, we'd better well be aware that we're not getting any help from anybody hardly in the world on that. We're doing it ourselves. And for what little has been done, we don't know whether people caused it or not. We've spent $34 to $38 billion for the small steps that have been taken. I think before you answer yes to something like that, you ought to know the causation and what it's cost the taxpayers to get what little we've got there. And I hope the record will reflect that. Ms. Greenwald, I know you, and I've served with you and admired you always. I can't remember if you were a Republican or a Democrat, though, when you were here.
Do I have to say?
No, you don't have to. I just remember that we worked on the Clean Air Act amendments and the Energy Policy Act, and since then we passed another landmark energy policy, 205 Energy Policy Act. And you've seen the development of new technologies in your position. Rather than government mandates, what are the most effective methods of advancing energy technologies and efficiencies? When we have a President Obama with his mandates, and he's not just got a war on coal, he has a war on energy. Could you give me some kind of an answer to that?
We believe that to get clean energy sources and energy efficiency into the marketplace requires a combination of policy and making sure that the market can work. So that's why we advocate for flexible policies and incentives so that you can set targets and requirements, but you leave to the private sector as much as possible the ability to make choices so that they pick the best technologies that can meet your environmental objectives.
We need to be aware of it and abreast of it and never forgetting it and looking at it every day. But we need to be reasonable about what we have to spend with no help from people that ought to be assisting us. Have you answered my question? I think you have. I'll use the rest of my time. I have about 37 more seconds to go here. I'm from Texas, and I'm a fossil fuels and oil and gas guy, but I've seen coal operation make significant investments and progress in advancing clean air emission controls and employing advanced technology. So I'm heavy on coal, and I think that this is an important meeting, and I thank all of you for your service. I yield back my 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 time. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for your good work yesterday.
Thank you very much. We made it. The votes have been called on the floor of the House, and everyone was very cooperative, so everyone got to participate in this hearing today. We thank the witnesses so much for your valuable testimony and the members for their questions. Members of the committee may have additional questions for you, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. We will look forward to your responses to those questions that you may be receiving shortly. Before we adjourn, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 items. First, a letter signed by 23 members of Congress, including me, to President Obama on July 22nd, expressing our concern about the implementation of the new source performance standards addressing greenhouse gas emissions for new and existing power plants. And secondly, 2 charts from DOE's International Energy Outlook, which was just released this morning, showing the forecast for global coal demand, which is projected to increase by 39% in the next 20 years. Without objection, so ordered. Obviously, those charts indicate that the subject of today's hearing is tremendously relevant, and the challenges exist for the technology that you espoused in your testimony, Mr. Collins, Ms. Greenwald. We look forward to your continued work, Mr. Yamagata, as well as the Department of Energy's continued work on fossil fuel technologies. The witnesses are excused with our deep gratitude, and this hearing is adjourned.